Hi everyone, we are back to our readings of the History Alive textbook for the Ancient Greece unit. So today we're actually going to do chapter 28, which is Fighting the Persian Wars. Typically this isn't a chapter that we would necessarily read straight out of the textbook because I do have visual notes that go with it. So my plan for this unit is I'm going to read the text and hopefully get a way to incorporate, still using the visual notes that I've created for the Persian Wars. We'll just have to see what happens. So again, we are reading History Alive, the Ancient World. Today we're looking at chapter 28, Fighting the Persian Wars. Section 1, Introduction. In chapter 27, you learned about two very different city-states, Athens and Sparta. Sometimes their differences led these city-states to distrust each other. But between 499 and 479 BCE, they had a common enemy, the Persian Empire. At the time, Persia was the largest empire the world had ever seen. Its powerful kings ruled over lands in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. During the 400s BCE, the Persians invaded Greece, and the Persian Wars began. To fight the Persians, the Greek city-states eventually banded together as allies. Allies are states that agree to help each other against a common enemy. Throughout history, soldiers have written home before a battle. We can imagine the kind of letter an Athenian might have written to his family. The Persians are fierce fighters, but I will stand shoulder to shoulder with the brave men of Greece, Spartans as well as fellow Athenians, and fight to the death, if that is what it takes to stop these murderous invaders. The tiny Greek city-states had much less land and far fewer people than Persia. How could they possibly turn back the powerful invaders? In this chapter, you will learn about important battles during the Persian Wars and discover who won them. Okay, so now we're looking at chapter 28, section 2, the Persian Empire and the Ionian Revolt. Essentially, this is the start of the Persian Wars, Persia versus Greece. The Persians started out as a small tribe in present-day Iran. They built a large empire by conquering their neighbors. Persian archers won many battles by unleashing a storm of arrows before their enemies were close enough to use their lances or spears. At its height, the Persian Empire was the largest empire the world had ever known. It was ruled by powerful kings who conquered Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and parts of India and Europe. To rule such a large area, King Darius, one of the greatest of the Persian kings, divided the empire into 20 provinces known as satrapies. He established a tax collection system and appointed officials to rule local areas. But he allowed conquered people to keep their own customs and religions. The Ionian Revolt, which began in 499 BCE, marked the beginning of the Greek-Persian War. In 546 BCE, the Persians had conquered the wealthy Greek settlements in Ionia, in Asia Minor. The Persians took the Ionians' farmland and harbors. They forced the Ionians to pay tributes or regular payments of goods. The Ionians also had to serve in the Persian army. The Ionians knew they could not defeat the Persians by themselves, so they asked mainland Greece for help. Athens sent soldiers and a small fleet of ships. Unfortunately for the Ionians, the Athenians went home after their initial success, leaving small Ionian army to fight alone. In 493 BCE, the Persian army defeated the Ionians. To punish the Ionians for rebelling, the Persians destroyed the city of Miletus. They may have sold some of its people into slavery. So essentially what we have is a Greek colony or a settlement that is not a part of mainland Greece, which is called Ionia, and it was on Asia Minor. That is going to be part of the first areas that the Persians are eventually going to be expanding to as they get closer to the Mediterranean world. And the Ionians will get some help from the Athenians, but as soon as Athens kind of leaves them, the Persians are going to take them right back over again. This conflict is going to be what really makes the Persians realize that mainland Greece is going to be their next target, and essentially the Ionian Revolt is what starts the Persian-Greek Wars. Okay, so before we start reading the third section of chapter 28, I do want to point out that the Persian Wars is going to be a series of many years, many leaders, many battles. Our textbook's only going to focus on a few significant battles and kind of what they meant for the turning points in the war. I do also want to point out that the Ionian Revolt that we were just reading about, that was starting in 499 BCE. And we're going to be looking at a battle that happened in 490 BCE. So a whole 9 years is going to pass between that revolt and then this first battle that we're looking at. So without further ado, chapter 28, section 3, the Battle of Marathon, a stunning victory. After the Ionian Revolt, King Darius decided to conquer the city-states of mainland Greece. He sent messengers to ask for presents of Greek earth and water. The presents would be a sign that the Greeks agreed to accept Persian rule. But the Greeks refused to hand over the tribute. Instead, they threw the messengers into pits and wells. Legend has it that they shouted, "If you want Greek earth and water, help yourselves." Darius was furious. In 490 BCE, he sent a large army of foot soldiers and cavalry across the Aegean Sea by boat to Greece. The army assembled on the plain of Marathon. See map on page 277. I'll include some maps as well to show you. A brilliant general named Miltiades convinced the other Greek commanders to fight the Persians at Marathon. Desperate for help, the Athenians sent a runner named Phidippides to Sparta. Phidippides ran for 2 days and 2 nights. When he arrived, he found the Spartans celebrating a religious festival. They told him that they could not leave Sparta until the next full moon. It's going to be too long. The Athenians and their allies had to face the Persians alone. Miltiades stretched his men across a narrow valley. For several days, both sides hesitated to attack. Finally, Miltiades decided to attack. He ordered the center portion of his army to advance. When the Persians came forward to meet them, he ordered the left and right sides of his army to sweep down and attack the Persians from the sides as well. Soon the Persian soldiers were running for their ships. Then the Greeks marched back to Athens in time to defend the city against the Persian cavalry. The Greeks had won a stunning victory, but this fight with the Persians was only beginning. So this is one of the first significant battles. And we're also going to be able to see the diagram of kind of this battle strategy and how they were able to win. Essentially, the Greeks have what we call home court advantage here. It's much harder to essentially kill your enemy as you are in the attack mode. It's a little bit easier to defend, and that was essentially what allowed them to be victorious in this first Battle of Marathon. All right, before we get started on the next section, we are moving into the Battle of Thermopylae, which is also called the Last Stand of 300. Definitely one of the most famous battles of the Persian Wars, and it's no doubt as to why it was included in our textbook for the Persian Wars. So we are going to be looking at, again, another 10-year gap between the Battle of Marathon and the Battle of Thermopylae. So even though it's just a few seconds really in our reading, we're looking at almost your entire lifetime has passed between Marathon and the Battle of Thermopylae. So keep that in mind as we read 28.4, the Battle of Thermopylae, the Bravery of 300. After King Darius died, his son King Xerxes organized another attack on Greece. By the way, not so sure what happened to Daddy Darius. Thinks he just got sick. Now King Xerxes is in charge. It wasn't any sort of like crazy battle scene death or anything like that. Xerxes put together a huge army of more than 180,000 soldiers. To get his army to Greece, Xerxes chose to cross the Hellespont, a narrow sea channel between Europe and Asia. There he made 2 bridges by roping hundreds of boats together with wooden boards across their bows. Don't worry, I've got some pictures I'll share you of how crazy that must have looked. Then he walked his army across the channel into Europe. True story. In 480 BCE, Xerxes marched west from the Hellespont and then south. Several Greek city-states were overwhelmed. Athens and Sparta decided to work together to fight the enemy. The Athenian navy would try to stop the Persian navy. Meanwhile, the Spartan king, Leonidas, would try to stop the Persian army. So when we think of Athens, we know they're by the water. They're very strong with their ships, and that's going to mean they also have a very strong navy, soldiers on boats, right? And we also know that the Spartans are pretty much training for soldiers in war their entire lives. So the Spartans have a very strong army, soldiers on land. So Athenian navy, Spartan army, working together for this one. Meanwhile, the Spartan king Leonidas would try to stop the Persian army. The Spartans chose to make their stand at a place called Thermopylae, where the Persian army would have to go through a narrow pass between mountains and the sea. Leonidas only had 6,000 to 7,000 soldiers to stop 180,000 Persians. Still, when the Persians tried to get through the pass, the Greeks drove them back. Then a Greek trader offered to show the Persians a secret path through the mountains. The path would allow them to attack the Greeks from the front and the rear at the same time. I've got a diagram I'll show you. Essentially, if you know the secret passageway and you know how to get through the mountains and get on the other side of the Greeks, once you have them surrounded, the numbers are going to be in the Persians' favor. Leonidas knew that he could only delay the Persians after the whole traitor incident. To keep his army from being destroyed, he ordered most of his troops to escape. With a much smaller army, including 300 Spartans, he prepared to fight. The Spartans were obedient to the end. Legend says they fought until their weapons broke. Then they fought with their hands. In the end, all 300 were killed, including King Leonidas, but the Greeks would never forget their bravery. Next, we're going to move into chapter 28, section 5, the Battle of Salamis, the Navy to the rescue. So they've just had a really horrible defeat at the Battle of Thermopylae. Thankfully, King Leonidas knew that they had been deceived essentially by a traitor. So he was able to get many of the soldiers out of there, and very few stayed to fight to the death. And they were there really just to hold the Persian army off as long as they could so they could get people out of the towns that the Persians were coming to. So now we're going to go ahead and move forward just a little bit to the Battle of Salamis, the Navy to the rescue. When the news of the slaughter at Thermopylae reached Athens, its citizens panicked. They boarded ships and sailed for nearby islands. They left in such a hurry that they had to leave their pets behind. Legend has it that one loyal dog swam alongside a ship, following its master all the way to the shore, where it died. Only a small army was left to defend the city. Within 2 weeks, Xerxes had burned Athens to the ground. An Athenian navy leader, Themistocles, thought he knew a way to defeat the Persians. He wanted to fight their navy in the narrow channels between the islands and the mainland. The Persians would find it hard to move their ships around and attack the Greek navy. For his plan to work, Themistocles had to get the Persian ships into a channel near a place called Salamis. So Salamis is a town on Greece, but this is a channel right by that town, which is why it's known as the Battle of Salamis. So he set a trap. He sent a loyal slave to Xerxes' camp with a message. The message said that Themistocles wanted to change sides and to join the Persians. If Xerxes attacked now, it said, half the Greek sailors would surrender. Xerxes fell for the trick. He ordered the ships to enter the narrow waterway between Salamis and the mainland to attack. As the Persians approached, the Greek ships seemed to retreat, but this was just another trick to draw the Persians further into the channel. Soon the Greeks had them surrounded. The Greek ships had wooden rams at the front. They rammed into the Persian boats, crushing their hulls and sending 300 of the ships to the bottom of the sea. The Greeks had only lost 40 ships. Once again, the Greeks had beaten the mighty Persian Empire, really through strategy, because the numbers were not in their favor. All right, our last section in the textbook, chapter 28, section 6, the Battle of Plataea, the end of the Persian Wars. After the defeat of Salamis, Xerxes fled with some of his soldiers. He was afraid the Greeks would get to the Hellespont first and destroy the bridges he had built. Remember, all the boats strapped together, that was the bridge. He was worried the Greeks were going to destroy it. However, as it turned out, the bridges had already been wrecked by a fierce storm. Xerxes had to ferry his men across the water by boat. Xerxes left the rest of his army in Greece with orders to attack again in the spring. When spring arrived, the Persians approached Athens once more. The Spartans feared that the Athenians, with their city destroyed, would agree to make peace with Persia. But the Athenians proudly declared their common brotherhood with the Greeks. They would fight. The decisive battle took place outside of the town of Plataea in 479 BCE. Led by the Spartans, a force of 80,000 Greek troops destroyed the Persian army. The threat from the Persian Empire was finally over. The important victory preserved the Greeks' independence and kept Persia from conquering all of Europe. The Greeks paid a high price for their victory. Thousands of Greeks were dead, and the city of Athens was in ruins. But the Athenians would soon rebuild their city and raise it to an even greater glory. Thanks for listening. We are going to be writing a war letter from one of these battles, so you're going to get to pretend to be one of these soldiers and writing a letter home to a loved one, either as you're going into a battle or right after a battle has been done. So stay tuned for more information on our war letters. Thanks for listening.